Hey, what's up, everybody? So today I'm going to talk about a particular topic that I was inspired with the idea for last year, and I only just got kind of re-inspired today to do it, which I'll get into. But so last year, while I was animating, I was watching these vlogs made by Doug and Rob Walker of the That Guy with the Glasses crew. And they were talking about their reactions to the Last Airbender, or Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra episodes, because Rob had seen the show for a long time and Doug was just seeing it for the first time. It was really cool, and I'd suggest you go check them out if you've not seen them before, and especially if you're fans of those series. But there was a particular phrase that was coming up that is what sparked this idea. It was whenever a moment in a particular episode would come up where, you know, maybe something a little mature would happen, whether it was something really violent or like a sexual overtone or a particular kind of joke or whatever. They'd often talk about, oh, like, wouldn't it be cool if like Nickelodeon, would be able to push that a little further, like, oh, they could have gone a little further than they were, than they chose to or whatever. And then it would come down to, well, it's a kid show. What are you going to do? Like we said, kid show. That would come up a lot. Now, that phrase didn't necessarily upset me or anything, but it reminded me of something that I'd been thinking about for a while, and that started from, and I think a lot of people have probably gone through this, especially like when you're an American, or I guess when you're a non-Japanese person who was introduced to anime, and the idea of like, oh, there are cartoons for adults, especially in the 90s. There's these animated shows with like mature stuff, like it's sex and violence and killing and blah, 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 etc. And then you kind of learn about censorship and standards and practices for what, is acceptable on American television and what isn't, etc. And that's a whole nother, well, it's not a whole nother subject because it does kind of tie into this a bit, but particularly what it is that is the core of this topic is how I think there's this deal where certain people take something being a for kids thing, not the company, something aimed towards children, means that it should be or could be or gets away with being of lesser quality than something that is for adults. I'm going to be a little all over the place for this topic, so I apologize. But I wrote some notes down, which is not something I often do. But so hopefully you'll all be able to keep up with my inane nonsense. With TV shows, I think it's the most like it's black and white at times. And also, by the way, I'm talking about animation specifically. With live action shows and movies and things, I think that there's a little bit more leniency, and it allows for different parts of the spectrum and all colors of the rainbow, something for everybody. But with animation particularly, it's and again, especially for TV shows and movies, I would say, it's kind of like what I said about in my Anime is Not a Genre Kirblog. It all got summed up into this. Anime is not a genre, just like how animation is not a genre. They're mediums of which to, portray stories of different genres. But with television shows, I feel like it's the most kind of, at least to maybe like a mainstream kind of, viewer or something of like, this is a kid show or this is an adult show or whatever. It's either like something on regular hours of Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon or Disney XD or WB or whatever. And then there's, this is for Adult Swim or Comedy Central, etc. And now I think in recent years, thanks to stuff like Adventure Time and regular show, not the shows themselves, but more so the decisions to have them in this kind of in-between area, like between regular hours of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim. That's just one example. And then there's cases with, with certain Nickelodeon shows and Disney shows as well. But I think that we're beginning to get more, types of things on the spectrum. So, which is good, because I think that we need that, and that's kind of, going to, disprove the point that I don't want to have to make about, how people in positions of power are just kind of like, pushing everything to this is for kids or this is for adults. Movies, I feel, they kind of get also a little bit more of the spectrum, they get a little bit more leeway on that. This is also part of what inspired the topic in the first, or re-inspired me to do the topic was earlier today. Liz, I'm recording this on Thursday. Liz linked me to this Watch Mojo video. It was like the top 10 must see animated films for adults. And what was interesting to me about it was the fact that it had a bunch of stuff that was, because I mean, of course, obviously movies have their rating system and everything, but they had stuff that were technically, not adult necessarily oriented movies, or some of them were, like rated R or whatever. But like, we had stuff from Coraline and Fantastic Mr. Fox to, the South Park movie and Akira and stuff like that. And, and those are, if you really want to get technical with at least just the rating system, it's like some of those are rated G and PG, or, and some of them are PG-13 and R. And, in some minds, those are completely different types of movies, and yet they were all on the same list of, adult or mature animated films. I think what it is that it stems from the most is the fact that, like, and I don't even know if this is like exclusively an American thing, but it kind of feels like it is, in that, like, censoring and trying to specifically gear something towards a younger audience. I think it's because of the potential of like mass appeal. And, and I think that the ultimate proof of that are stuff like, Pixar movies, which, those are great balances of like, these can be watched by anybody and they can be enjoyed by anybody. Even then, there will still be like some adults who are like, oh, whatever, it's a cartoon, so I'm not going to take it seriously. But like, maybe like underneath it all, they'll be like, oh, but that one part from Monsters Inc. or whatever, whatever Incredibles like really resonated with me, but I can't let the other adults know because that I was moved by a cartoon or something. I don't know. Maybe yes and no, a little bit of that, but I get why the appeal of gearing something, as young as possible so that anybody above can still watch it anyway, as opposed to the opposite, where if it's more aimed towards adults, in terms of like if it's got maybe some sexual stuff or violent stuff or whatever for a particular kind of purpose, then maybe they wouldn't want their kids to watch it, and kids wouldn't. I mean, they will anyway. I mean, I knew people in third grade that were watching South Park like as they were airing. They weren't sneaking up to watch it; they were just watching it. So, what do I know? But yeah, and it's interesting too. And I say it feels like an American thing because with other places like and maybe some of my international listeners could chime in on this in the comments, but in Europe, it seems like, I think because art is just like more of a generally kind of accepted thing, and that includes cartoons and animation. In Europe, it seems like there's a little bit more of like an openness to, that sort of thing without it being like, oh, this is for children, this is, whatever. And in Japan, especially, and this kind of loops back to the bit about anime stuff, it's like, to them, like they produce anime the way that we produce television. Going back to that too, where like live action stuff, I think that has a little bit of an easier leeway in terms of, like cursing or nudity or whatever in terms of like what is on the maturity scale and what kind of things they can touch on in that sort of way. But with Japan, like they produce comics and animation, in any sort of way like that. And their sense of maturity is interesting too, because it's like, okay, I always has to come back to Dragon Ball every time. Dragon Ball, I remember, was one of those shows that, like, when I was a kid, and it was, marketed as a kid show when it first came out over here. When kids were finding out, like other kids my age were finding out about the Japanese version and all the stuff that was being censored and cut over here, it was like, oh, like, look at what we're missing. Like, this show is for adults. It's like, no, it's not. Dragon Ball was a comic that was published in a magazine specifically aimed towards little boys, and it happens that shonen is a audience, I guess, genre. I don't fully know how to define that, but it's something that happens to have a lot of mass appeal in that way, and that, a lot of the series that have come out of that, like One Piece and Naruto and Bleach and all that stuff, and Dragon Ball, of course, have a lot of worldwide appeal to a lot of different types of folks of all ages and both genders, I would say. But it's not for adults. It was not like meant for adults or whatever, just because it has, blood or swearing or dying in it or whatever. That doesn't inherently make it adult. Their sense of maturity, from at least what I interpret as from what I've seen, is like, when you're a kid, I find very often that you will be, attracted to and really like wowed by mature things, quote unquote mature, like, oh, this has got like blood and guts and killing and swearing and nudity and sex and whatever, all in it. And then you're like intrigued by that and you want to see that, if you're like, 10 or 12, sometimes that's the case. It's very often the case. And, like Dragon Ball has all of that stuff in it, I would say. But it was still a children's comic. And to go back to, the other reality of it was created by an adult. I think Matt, who was it? No, not Matt Wilson. It was Ryan Miller, who I've talked about before. He said this, these kids shows, quote unquote, are being made by adults. So if they were made from the pandering mindset of like, oh, I'm just going to make it for kids and not for something that they themselves would enjoy, then it's not going to have any soul. And I think that people can tell, I think viewers can tell when something is made by committee and it's just like completely fucking stupid, and those shows don't tend to last for very long. So if that says anything. But yeah, it's, I guess to get to the core of this too, of really what I'm worried about is I don't think that if something is geared for a particular audience because it's going for that, if it's being, aimed at a certain audience, especially if it's a kid audience, I don't think that needs to be an excuse for it being of bad quality. And I don't think that's I don't think that keeping that up, because that's creating a vicious cycle of like, oh, well, kid stuff is kid stuff and it's not good or whatever. It's like I said about that top 10 list or whatever. It's like there were movies on that list that were technically, again, by the rating system's definition, they were kids' movies, and some of them were adult movies. But anybody could watch those, and anybody could get something out of them, I think. Like, I'm trying to think of what even is like this perception. Is, oh, kids, dumb fart jokes, bright colors. Like, no. The one particular medium that makes me the most worried is video games. Because video games, it really, like, you can be into whatever type of style or presentation or type of game you want or whatever, but if it's a badly designed game, or if it's a less than stellar quality game, if it's flat out bad, but if you go to, oh, but kids might like it, it's like, no, that's not good. Because, like, I was a kid and I grew up with amazing games, really genuinely good games. And I also know to go back and look on, like, my dad and I had great memories with, like, the Tasmania and Tiny Toon Adventures games, and a lot of these Sega Genesis ones. But I can go back and look and say that some of those are not inherently good, even if I have nostalgic memories for them. And then there are other games that I grew up with that I know are absolutely fucking outstanding, that I've talked about on many other Kirblogs before. And like, I can't remember who it was, but it was on some review or something. Somebody said, oh, maybe kids might like Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric, because of the colorful characters and the stupid jokes or whatever, but the gameplay isn't that great. And I'm like, then why would kids like it if the game isn't good, if it's not fun to play? And I'm not going to get into a big rant about Sonic Boom or whatever, but that's my point. Is I think somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said that in a review, and that was making me worry. And I feel like I've seen that phrase used for games recently, and that's what's really making me worry. Like, more so, I think, even than than cartoons and movies, because it's like if we get to a point where, like, oh, we'll just design, it's a kid's game, who cares? Like, we don't have to put any effort into this. It's like, no, that's bad. If anything, maybe that's been the case in the past. Maybe some of the movie tie-in games, or like, or TV show tie-in games and stuff like that, like even back in the day on like Super Nintendo and Genesis, maybe those were examples of that. I don't know. It's possible, but I don't think that's something that needs to happen with this. I think. What am I getting to with this? I guess I think that mediums shouldn't be cornered into something because of a target audience. They shouldn't be limited by this possibly skewed perception of, what are these types of people like, and what are they going to be receptive to, and what are they going to enjoy? I think that anybody can enjoy something good. That's the most general that I can possibly fucking get about it, but there's a very big difference between quality and taste. Tastes are completely up to the individual person, be it whatever age or gender or anything they are. I think that it is all entirely down to taste in that sense. But as far as quality, I think that any type of person can enjoy something that is of good quality, that has actual effort put into it. If it happens to be, like designed in a way that is accessible to a wider amount of people, maybe people who have had more life experiences, or maybe people who have had less life experiences, and therefore it's a little more simple, or a little less or more complicated, or whatever. It's like, sure, that's fine. I'm certainly not saying that like everything has to be consolidated to one, age range. Like, I do think that what really should be defined as, kid stuff or adult stuff, or, the many, many different things in between. I'm not saying that those things shouldn't, can't be defined. They certainly can. But I think what people are defining or choosing to define as kid stuff is not a good thing. And I don't want it to cripple anybody with any sense of creativity, to hold themselves back. And I wish that there were maybe people in power that have maybe a little bit of a wider foresight. And I think, I think that it is possible that, like I said, on the positive side, we have these shows that are getting on these time slots that are, we just found out earlier today, Dragon Ball Kai is going to be aired on Cartoon Network at 8 o'clock. Just before Adult Swim, but it won't be part of Adult Swim. And it's going to be uncut at 8 o'clock at night on Saturday. I don't think that's really... Well, no, that very rarely happens. I think we had an uncut run of the original DBZ briefly on weekday nights on Cartoon Network, and that was also before Adult Swim, and those were uncut, with everything intact and everything. So I don't know. I certainly hope, like, as the years pass, we'll have it open to a lot more... spaces in between, and it won't be so like black or white with everything, really. And hopefully people will continue to produce good stuff, and hopefully we won't have to wade through a sea of bad stuff to find the good, So I guess that's a little of a lofty way to end, but that's all I have to say for now. So I guess in the comments below, do you agree with this? Do you have any further thoughts about this particular topic? Like, what do you think it is that defines, kids or adults or teens or, anything, old people, shows or movies or games or anything? What is it that you think about this whole, what is your perception? I'm curious. Do you agree in terms of that quality should not be affected by whatever the target audience is? Should everything be, held to a certain level of quality? Let me know. And if you have ideas for future Kirblog topics, you can leave a comment about that too, or hit me up on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, whatever you feel like. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.